Hello, welcome to the Intellectual Podcast. I'm your host, David S. Dossing. We are trying something new. This is the first of a series of live streams that we are doing with a new system from StreamYard, and hopefully it's going to allow us to do more live streams with far more interactivity and kind of, panache, a little bit nicer look than what we've done in the past. I'm going to get right into it after I do one little thing. I want to remind you that we're a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. Be sure to check out all the other geeky podcasts available at Gonna Geek. And I'm going to bring in my co-host for today, Miss Whitney Wegman. Hello, Whitney.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing in pandemic?
Doing all right. Just hanging out at the house.
I understand you actually went down to some of the demonstrations in La Mesa the other day before things got all out of whack and weird.
I did. We went really early. We were very cognizant of the social distancing, like kept our mask on, and we're like, okay, I'm not gonna touch anything, just gonna keep this far away from people. But we were there, like I said, early when it was quite a peaceful protest. But then we were able to watch a lot of live streams towards the end of the evening whenever it got really dangerous and scary and crazy. There was actually one guy, because the news kind of stopped broadcasting at like 8 o'clock Friday night.
Which is right when things got weird. Right?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I said it was Saturday night.
Time in pandemic. Who knows what day it is?
But there was a guy named Brant Tuck was on roller skates, just rolling around, just becoming citizen reporter and doing a really thorough job and checking on people's businesses and stuff. So it was kudos on him for keeping everyone informed despite like being in chaos. It was I wouldn't have that seemed really frightening to me, but
yeah. Well, we gotta thank the people who are functioning as citizen journalists. We should thank all of the credentialed journalists that are putting themselves in harm's way, because they're doing the work that gets the truth out of what's really happening. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, with all the turmoil and weird shit going on in our lives right now, and how important news is, our guest today I don't think could be any more relevant to what's happening. Roman Koenig is a long friend of mine. We've been filmmakers together. Actually, one of the first films I ever worked on outside of my own productions was one of Roman's movies, a film called Human Resource, which dovetails into the stories that we'll be talking about from his novel that he has recently released called Black Market News. So why don't we bring Roman in? He can tell us a little bit about Black Market News, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about what's going on in the world. Hi, Roman.
Hey, you two. How you doing?
How's it going, sir?
Good. Busy in quarantine, but I'm hanging in there.
Well,
how about you guys?
We do our thing. On top of everything, you also teach college courses, right? In journalism.
I do, yeah, at San Diego State and at City College, and that depending on how time permits, there's a whole host of stuff to talk about that, and teaching online and social media and all that stuff too. It's been crazy, yeah.
So you moved to the teaching online.
Yeah, and it's it helped for me because I've taught online before, so I know how to do that. But a lot of students have not taken online classes before.
Right.
So there was sort of a relearning process for me, because it's easy to teach people who anticipate certain things online. And a lot of the students, especially at San Diego State, didn't know what to expect because they haven't been in an online environment for college before. So it's been an interesting learning curve. Yeah.
Wow. I don't know if you see the little bug on the screen there, Roman, but
yes.
Carla says, hi, guys.
Hi, Carla.
Hi, Carla.
I want to point out that Carla is actually the person who introduced us. She hired me on your film Human Resource.
That's right.
So, hello,
Good
Carla.
to see you, Carla. Hello, Carla.
Thanks for joining us. And nice to see that our new system's working. Like, I'm able to pull up Facebook comments. So, yeah, if you've got comments for Roman while we're talking to him, type them into the comments. And, if I got time to interject them into our conversation, I'd be happy to do that.
Great.
Roman, Black Market News. Whitney hasn't had a chance to read it. She's been busy going out and protesting and teaching and doing other things that Whitney does. I managed to get almost to the end. I haven't finished it, but for our viewers and our listeners on the podcast later, can you tell us a little bit about what Black Market News is about?
Yeah, so the story in short is about this character, Quinn, and he comes out of college having gone through a pretty severe incident in his life where he's basically severely injured in an attack of some kind. And it shapes his worldview as a result. He's a survivor, for one. And from there, he rebuilds himself physically and emotionally and goes into this world of black market news. He becomes basically an underground journalist in a future United States where everything is dominated by a single corporate conglomerate, where government and everything's all one and the same. It's all one thing. And it's really hard to get a message out. It's hard to find the truth. It's hard to hear anything else other than what the corporate line, which is the government line, is going to be. So he and a group of his friends try to seek the truth about what happened to him, and they uncover a much larger, scandalous situation that they try to undo and make right.
And wow, man! After what I saw this weekend, like that sounds a little too plausible.
Yeah. And it's kind of it's a little unnerving. I wish I could say it was surprising, maybe, but I don't know at this point. But there's a lot of stuff in the book that is really relevant to what's going on right now.
Well, so I guess a good question would be, when did you start ruminating on this idea? Like, are you being precognizant right now? Like.
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because the original version of this story dates back to 20 years ago. In 1999, 2000, the original Black Market News was my thesis, research, and film project at San Diego State for my film degree. So this story has morphed and changed in some form or another for the last 20 years. And every time that I would revise it, something has happened that falls right in line with what the story sort of predicted, even back to the year 2000. So this version of the story I started working on in 2017 as a novel form. And I just kept, as things kept going on in the last 2 years, I kept sort of revising the work to update it, to keep it relevant to what's going on. It's been crazy. Yeah, it goes back 20 years.
Yeah, in the novel, kind of the large conglomerate that is taking over everything is called E-State, and E-State was the entity in Human Resource, the film that I worked with you on 20 years ago. So you've been ringing this bell for a very, very long time. Yeah,
I have. And the book is also a merger of the original Black Market News and Human Resource, which was the film we worked on. So some people who are familiar with that movie and my original work will see both of those stories merged together into this one. You could make a series out of it just because of the world that it's been built into, but I'm happy to get this off my back because it's a story. Even Human Resource was designed to be an improvement from what I learned in college as a separate film, and it's time to move on. The book is sort of like the ultimate final message, and I'm glad it's finished.
Well, having been with you on that journey for the last 20 years, and I've watched, if not all of your films, I've watched most of your films over this time, and certainly you and I have had plenty of discussions about these themes and these topics over the years. What I really enjoyed reading Black Market News was the maturity that has come into your ability to tell this story has, I think, finally matched the kind of thoughts you had about it as a younger man. And I think you really managed to bring that maturity to it now and tell this story in a way I don't think you were quite capable of doing when you were a younger man. And it was really neat to read it and kind of see those ideas evolve and grow. in the course of this novel.
That's a great observation, because I feel that way myself about it too. It's been really fascinating as a journey to see where the story, not just the story itself started, but the maturity in how I tackled the subject matter and how I've written it. It's changed dramatically in the last 20 years. One of the toughest things that I had going into filmmaking, as a writer especially, is writing dialogue, which always seemed to surprise me. But over time, I discovered that writing dialogue was really difficult for me.
Mhm.
And the journey for writing dialogue has been really amazing to see in my own work. When I see my early work and I see my work now, it's night and day, you know? So I can see that maturity and that growth in myself too. It's been a really cool experience. So I really like that you noticed that, because I feel that way too.
Yeah,
So
well,
now-
it's that separation of characters. Like, I think you're better at kind of understanding opposing viewpoints and differing viewpoints in a way you didn't before, and you were able to kind of really flesh these characters out and make them feel more real, as opposed to just an extension of your voice.
Yeah,
which is what I felt in your earlier works.
totally. I agree with that
Everybody
too.
sounded like Roman before, and now everybody's got an interesting and unique voice, which is really cool.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
now,
I was
Roman,
very impressed.
You said that obviously you're a filmmaker and you've done a lot of screenplays and stuff. Are you strictly? I mean, is this your first novel? Where does it fall on the spectrum of your writing?
Yeah, this is my first novel, and it came about as a result of a challenge among a group of friends of mine and I. We've known each other since high school. I didn't know Dave in high school, but we sort of passed, in the night, right? So these friends of mine from high school and we challenged each other back in 2017 for all of us to write a novel, that all of us would get a novel done in 2 years' time. And that's what sparked the momentum to actually get this done as a novel, because I figured, I've got this story. I've got to get it out of my system once and for all. I finally have an opportunity to get this done. So I used this story as that challenge for my novel that I was going to write. So I'd like to write another. I really enjoyed the process. I hope it takes a shorter time than 2 years, but some novel writers take 5, 10, 15 years to write a single book. So
Yeah, George Martin.
yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. So I'd like to write. I've gotten the bug in me now. And I was telling Dave yesterday that one of the things that I really liked about writing the novel version of this is that I didn't have to hire a crew. I didn't have to cast actors. I didn't have to have a production budget. And I could write anything I wanted without special effects, without sets, without craft services, whatever it might be.
No limitations.
No limitations. And, especially in COVID time right now, this is a really good outlet for my storytelling. So I would like to explore doing this more as a result. Yeah.
Can you talk about like the difference in process for screenwriting versus writing a novel?
Sure. The biggest thing I learned was how much open space you have, because up until this point, I've written only scripts, and scripts are very plug and play, right? They're utilitarian. They're not designed to be read. They're designed to be performed. And so once I put the first version of the novel together, I realized I had all these gaps. The first people that read it for feedback, this writing circle was that group. They were saying, yeah, but there's missing development over here. And what about the character over here? And what's the motivation over there? And I missed a lot of that, because in a script, you don't necessarily go that deep into it unless you're doing a TV series, let's say. But I didn't have that. So the biggest thing for me was realizing I have every rule not just every rule, but every space in the toolbox. And it's not just a toolbox anymore, it's a meadow. And then it's not just a meadow, it's a whole planet worth of material I could pull from, that an 80-page script doesn't need. This is a book that has to be 400 pages or whatever it might be. I don't remember what the word count is on this book. Yeah, I don't remember.
I know that the Kindle told me it should take me about 6.5 hours to read.
It is on the shorter end of a novel. I sort of pushed the limit on the bottom end of what the word count should be. That much I know. But then again, in creative work, what's the minimum word count anyway, right?
Because it feels lean, you know, like there's not I mean, you're very descriptive, and I actually found myself greatly enjoying how descriptive you are in your work, but it's not bloated. Everything felt like it had purpose and drive to getting through the narrative. You know, sometimes I read some of these novels and it's just like, okay, how much does this guy really like to read his own words? You know, like I don't need 40 pages on how a brick wall looks.
Right. That's a good point. One of the Matt Racine, he's one of the people I've got to credit him with this particular point that he noticed when I put this book together. He was in the writing circle that was part of the writing challenge for this. And he said, you know, you should write a script first for every novel you want to write, because it seemed to work as such a good blueprint for
it's a great outline.
Yeah. It is a great outline. You know, so often a book becomes a novel, but a book becomes a screenplay, but in the reverse, it's a great way to approach an outline for a novel. And I think that Black Market News hit that good note of being just descriptive enough, like you were saying, without being bloated, because I don't like bloated writing. It's just not how I was raised, right? So
it offends the journalist in you.
It does, yeah, you know. And speaking of journalism in this, I find that this change in writing has been a really nice opportunity for me. It's been a real refreshing change of pace to actually write about something that's not true. And, you know, and writing and crafting fiction for a change, instead of going out and reporting and doing the research, getting back to your audience and informing them. I like that this novel informs, but it's also a novel and not fact-based, because I can take some liberties that you can't and shouldn't in journalism. So,
right.
Yeah.
So the difficulty I always have, and we've talked about it with other writers on the podcast, is sitting down and actually writing. And you spoke about kind of a challenge you did with your friends to write a novel in 2 years. What is that process like? How do you force yourself to make that happen within 2 years? Did you schedule? Like, I know some writers like make a schedule and every day they sit down for a certain period of time. Other writers only write when, you know, the muse visits. What was your process in getting through it and getting it done?
The original writing process was much more muse-like. I was not writing every day at first. I would write depending on whether I was inspired that day to sit down and flesh some of the story out. It did help that I had the screenplay to work from. That was a huge difference. I don't know how this process would work for me if I didn't have a screenplay. I'll try that the next time. I'll be curious to see if I can just write something raw, stream of consciousness kind of thing. But once I got into the rhythm, I was writing every day. And I was writing at usually a coffee shop. It would be after I was done with classes. It would be in late afternoons. And I would be over at a place called Swell in Del Mar, which isn't there anymore. But, you know, the baristas there, you know, they became friends of mine because I was there literally, practically, almost every day, always writing on my novel. And then from there went the editing process. And all of that was a daily thing. It became literally a daily routine. If it was for 15 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, from maybe like the start of 2018, mid 2017, all the way through to the end of 2019. Yeah.
I guess it's just you and me.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you were a kid, like, did you always have a passion for writing? You just hear about a lot of people, like I've been reading a lot of Stephen King, and I recently read his book on writing. He talked about how he started writing. He was like 8 years old and writing stories. Have you always been a writer? Yeah, I would say that the writing developed for me in late elementary school into junior high. That's when it really started. And I discovered the passion for that by getting involved in the campus newspaper when I was in 7th and 8th grade. So I was already doing journalism by 7th and 8th grade, but I was also doing theater from
maybe at the age of 12, all the way up until, gosh, maybe about 15 years ago. So the writing itself as I do it now, I wasn't writing a lot of short stories and stuff like that, but I was getting into journalism really early, and I was into performing arts really early. So those two things sort of morphed into this by high school. And then that grew into my interest in film when I entered film studies back in the mid to late 90s. And I was doing a lot of writing by that point because that was part of what I was doing for a learning process. And I fell in love with screenwriting. Star Trek, of all things, also was a big influence in that. So was Twilight Zone. I loved that show. So I loved writing things that were really imaginative and took you outside of the present that we were in, the world that we were in, and taking you somewhere else. And I love the social commentary side of it too. It wasn't just about the creative writing. It was also seeing how I could make something relevant and thoughtful that was also entertaining at the same time. Yeah, all of that sort of morphed over the years.
And I feel like sci-fi does that really well, like addresses social concerns through this science fiction lens. So you mentioned Star Trek and Twilight Zone. What about favorite authors? Like, who inspired you?
George Orwell is a big one for me when it comes to novels. This is really weird. I don't know how it is that I didn't get into AP English or advanced prep English or whatever that was. I was never in that, but I was reading novels that should have placed me there by the age of 12, 10, 11, 12. I was in 7th grade during, remember sustained silent reading, or you had reading time when you were in elementary school and junior high. I was reading a book called We by a Russian author named Yevgeny Zamyatin, which was a dystopian novel from the 1920s. And I was reading that in 7th grade, followed by 1984 and Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. Excuse me. I was reading all of those really early on. So they shaped a lot of my worldview in terms of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to TV and movies, a lot of what Spielberg was putting out in the late 70s, Close Encounters, is a really influential movie on me. Star Wars, of course, is Jaws as well. And then Star Trek as well. The original 1960s show. Certainly Next Generation by the time I was in high school.
Yeah, I'm rewatching all that right now.
Yeah. So after season 2, those first 2 seasons are debatable. But once that season 3 hit, that was some really good TV writing and producing and performance,
Yeah, I just finished a binge watch of Star Trek Voyager. I realized after watching Picard that I'd never seen the entire season of Star Trek Voyager. It was the only Star Trek that I didn't watch in its entirety. So I rectified that the last couple of weeks. It was better than I thought it was.
I think the show has aged better than people would have expected. I found that I've been watching it when it shows up on BBC America sometimes. And I'll watch a bunch of the episodes, and I find myself liking the show more than I did when it was originally on. And I liked it when it was originally on, actually. Yeah. Sometimes it's interesting about Star Trek. I sometimes wish that the Next Generation had continued in the way Doctor Who continued, where Picard would have retired and Riker would have taken over, or maybe Riker would have left, and then Janeway would have taken over the Enterprise, and
if
Voyager
they handled
would have been
it like
Next
Grey's
Generation.
Anatomy or ER, where the people just cycle through as exactly. It would be on a real ship, right?
I kind of wish they'd done that, because we could have had Star Trek in that incarnation all the way through to this day with like 5 or 6 captains, right? With maybe a few movies thrown in there. Maybe they'll still do that, if the producers are listening. That might be a better way than doing this piecemeal, let's go forward and let's go backward and let's go to Discovery and let's go to, I have not watched Discovery, so. It's controversial. We can talk about that. We got time.
So in this whole realm of sci-fi and current reality, how do you feel about the fact that the government released that they have all this UFO footage and they dropped the bomb like in the middle of a pandemic, very quietly? Nobody's talked about it.
That just appeared in the news cycle pretty quickly. I noticed it was like there as a blip, and then it disappeared. I find that really interesting. I haven't had a chance to look at any of the stuff that's been released, but it might be time for a new X-Files of some kind, or a new Fringe, those two shows were perfect for this stuff. And, or maybe I'll look, I'm sure there are, any number of shows you could create out of that stuff, and I'll have to look at it myself. Did either of you watch Project Blue Book on, was that History Channel? I think it was on the History Channel. It was one of their shows.
I didn't.
It was actually a pretty, you would think things like History Channel, their shows are kind of like, I don't know, they're not known for their
shows have
dramatic
gone off the rails.
Yeah, but that was a pretty good show, actually. It's really loosely based on the real Blue Book. I mean, they take the Blue Book and then like blow it up into completely different things, but it's inspired from that, and you could probably take all sorts of stuff out of that new material they've released and create something new out of it. Totally.
Definitely.
So the themes of black market news, Roman, are pretty accessible to the things that we're going through today. What would you hope somebody who's watching what's going on in the world today would get out of reading your novel?
One of the things that I really hope people get out of it is to think critically about where we are in this moment and where it is that they get information that they think they believe and trust. The social media environment, one of the most frustrating things for me is this proliferation of fake news. And I changed that into something else. I call it fringe fact in the novel. Mm-hmm. And because I'm at a certain point where fake news is going to merge with the real thing. And then you have really this gray area. And I think fringe fact and fake fact, as I call it in the novel, I hope we don't go there, but that's what the book partly tackles.
Well, I think we're kind of there already.
Yeah, we might be. I mean,
when you start looking at the improprieties of all the major networks, I don't want to single one out over another because they've all had their improprieties. There's one specifically that I think is more guilty of it than the rest. Fox. But it is a danger right now that it's so hard to determine what is truth and what is you being spoon-fed an idea that they want you to believe.
And the actors are so good at it. That's the problem. And I have a kind of a funny story about this. When I was at Palomar College, I got my journalism. The only journalism degree I have is an associate's degree from Palomar College. That was, by the way, more than any bachelor's degree or four-year university I would have learned was there at a community college. Community colleges are a great place to go. Anyway, when I was one of the editors on the student newspaper there, The Telescope, we used to publish an April Fool's edition. And the April Fool's edition would be a chance for us to make up all these stories about people on campus and events and all this kind of stuff. I don't think you can get away with it anymore. Back in the 90s, that was like the last era where you could really push the envelope and not go and not ruin people's reputations. But I created this story for our spoof edition about how the president of the college, George Boggs, bought this restaurant in San Marcos that was called George Burgers. Maybe you've heard of it. It's an institution that's been in San Marcos for like 50 years, right? So
anybody who goes to Palomar College knows what George Burgers is.
Yeah, you go. That's where you go for lunch, right? So this story I wrote was about how George Boggs bought George Burgers and called it George Boggs Burgers. And the people at the owners of the restaurant were livid because they thought that I had written something that was supposed to be passed off as truth, and they wanted a retraction. Well, my advisor and I had to remind them that this is in a spoof edition. It says this is fake, and they still bought it as real. But then and I couldn't believe it that someone would actually take it as real. But then the two of us were talking to a student, and we mentioned the story in passing, and the student said, well, that didn't happen. And the student that we were talking to also thought that the story was real. And this was 1991, 1992.
Well, that's saying something because it's in a paper and it's definitively labeled as fake news.
And for fun, it was a joke.
But I have seen that play out over and over again as people discover the Onion for the first time.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Exactly.
All they see is a headline and a photo, and they go, "Oh, this is outrageous. Share. Can you believe this?" And
Exactly.
it's like, well, no,
That's why I
it's fake.
continuously get on people to like do your due diligence before hitting that share button. One, find out if it's supposed to be hyperbolic, and two, find out if it's like has any legs to stand on at all. People, that's the other thing about people are easily fooled because they don't take time to do logical research or use logic, period. But
No, I mean, and I think that's true. And one of the things that's really bothering me about social media right now is what's going on with Twitter. And this is not, I have friends who are, and colleagues who are supporters of the current president. And so I don't like to I try to avoid arguments with them because I just don't think it's worth it. However, not always worth it. Sometimes it's worth it, right? But the issue with Twitter and people's concerns about any political leader, it doesn't have to be just Donald Trump, it could be any political leader, saying things on Twitter that are patently, objectively and provably incorrect or false, right? That are not true, or inciting potentially violence. And Twitter is unwilling. He's still a private citizen, just like anybody else. And yet Twitter as a platform is unwilling to regulate it in some way. A little blue line underneath saying, check this out is, frankly, I don't think good enough. And I don't think social media platforms are realizing that they are also, they're not just aggregators. They're not just sending information out there. They're also, they're producers as well. I don't think they realize it yet, but by the act of allowing it on the platform, they're also producers. But that's also a whole other can of worms.
well, now they're going to have to moderate because Trump signed an executive order that they would be forced to moderate, which I don't think he realizes. They're going to moderate you, dude.
No, and that's not the right approach. Certainly, I don't think it's constitutionally viable anyway. But in Europe, there's an issue with this because in Europe, websites are responsible for commenters' comments. In the United States, courts have found that, as of now, at least still, that websites are not responsible for commenters' comments. And the issue there is, and I understand from this perspective, I understand why Twitter and why Facebook and others want to be hands-off on this. Because as soon as they take responsibility for those, then they can be sued for those and they can be found liable for those.
Yeah.
And they're not the ones producing the comments. Right, it's the commenters. In Europe, that's considered a moderation issue, and you've seen it. You're responsible for it. It's on your platform, and you could be sued for libel, whatever it might be, if it's untrue or slanderous. I don't know how I feel about that yet, to be honest. I actually don't. I'm not quite sure what to make of that.
Well, I've got another filmmaker friend of mine who's been just incessantly attacked by another filmmaker on various platforms, who's just like constantly posting negative crap about this guy, which is all totally false and untrue. Attacking movies that he's made that haven't been released yet. And, it's just it's an incessant burden of pain on this filmmaker that no matter how much he contacts various outlets, they're either slow to respond or they don't respond at all to removing, flat out blatant lies about his product, about his personages. It's such a bullying issue for him. And he feels like there's no support. And he's called me numerous times and asked, what do I do about this? And I keep telling him the only thing you can do is just ignore it.
Yeah.
But it's hard because, like, I get it. Those companies, if they start policing too much, then they start opening themselves up to the fact that they're liable for what's on their pages. And it's a catch-22 for them. They maybe want it to be a nice, fair place to be, but they don't want to become responsible for what people can write up there because they can't stay ahead of it. And the only way, inevitably, the only way to take care of it at that point is to remove that. And then they face criticisms of censorship. So.
I do think news outlets, news outlets certainly should moderate comments.
I agree
They
sure.
absolutely should. The problem is it's also very labor intensive. Algorithms don't always catch the bad actors, and so you have to have that human element in there. But news outlets are not doing very well right now because advertising revenue is tanked so much with COVID-19 and the economic shutdown, and so they barely have enough money.
Well, and they were having problems even before that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely they were.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What you mentioned brings up something that I remember. It's a story I share with my classes in mass communication, an incident that happened with a bakery in Escondido where they were getting ready to retire anyway, but they had come under attack on Yelp and social media they were accused of being involved in some racist incident that they had nothing to do with at all. But on Yelp, what started happening was that people who'd never been to the business, they just heard about what it was that happened, started posting reviews, quote unquote. People from Cincinnati or from Seattle or New York or wherever it was, who have no idea what this business is, saying, don't go there. They're a bunch of whatever. Libelous stuff. And it hurt what little business they had left, and they shut down, and they blamed the Yelp storm over something that the bakery itself had nothing to do with. But they got rolled into it, and they didn't mean it. It happens. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
So
terrible.
as a journalist and also a sci-fi aficionado, I would like to hear your thoughts about, there's a couple of new technologies that are in like beta in a couple colleges. One is one that seamlessly mimics people's voices to where you can basically have audio sounding like it's coming from the person. And the other one tracks the faces, and you can basically graft anyone's face. I don't know if you've seen these.
I've heard vaguely about these. I've heard vaguely about them.
All the deep fake stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you put it like that, deep fake. Yeah, I'm really worried about deep fakes. That's just another layer that gets added onto what we're dealing with in terms of what is factual and what is not. I prefer to say what is factual as opposed to, in some cases, what is truthful. It depends on what point of view you're looking at. Director Julie Taymor, she did the movie Frida. She did The Lion King on Broadway. I remember an interview with her, with Bill Moyers, where she said, truth artistically, it can be whatever is behind the eyes. So for her, truth is a subjective thing, but then there's objective truth in terms of what you factually gather to create a narrative of concrete things, right? Deep fakes pose a real challenge to that type of truth and that type of objective truth. And I don't know. I'm worried about it because
how do you combat that? Because
I don't want someone taking my face and taking my voice and feeding it through an algorithm and creating a video of me saying things that I have never said before. And then how do I challenge that when someone says, well, you said this, and here's the video proof, which doesn't exist, right? Yeah. There are telltale signs, fortunately, that you can still piece it apart and tell that it's not real. But I touch on that, I touch on this in Black Market News. Towards the end of the book, the CEO of eState is on trial. Basically, he's on congressional trial, a form of impeachment. And the only way that the members of the panel, there's one member of the panel in the book. I'm not giving away anything. There's no spoiler here, really. But there's a member of the panel that's trying him, where they're referring to time code and certain other digital footprints in footage that has to do with him. That's pretty damning. That confirms that it is real. We're going to have to, it's not, time code doesn't cut it anymore for that kind of thing, but we're going to have to think about some kinds of digital footprints that we can put into deep fake footage, whether it's audio or video or still image for that matter, that can show that this is an altered piece of material that does not come from an original source.
It's just so tough though, because by the time you do that digital forensics, it's already gone around the world on share.
Exactly.
Well, and on top of everything else, this democratization of filmmaking tools right? Which, as filmmakers, we've all been super excited about for the last 20 years and have benefited from.
Journalism too, by the way, both of us have been very liberating.
But it has totally changed the game for these bad actors in the world. They can do a deep fake on a really crappy laptop and fool half the world into believing something's real. The accessibility of the tools to do these very nefarious things are it's no longer there used to be like a gate, like you had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to create a fake newscast,
right?
We're doing this over the internet right now for like $40 a month.
Exactly. Just before campus shut down at San Diego State, I was talking to one of my freelance writers who's a student there. Not in any of my classes, but she's been a student at State, and she's one of my freelance writers for the North Coast Current. And we were talking about something, and I patted my laptop. I had it with me. I said, my newsroom's right here. And within a week, everything was shut down, right? And then I'm hearing from the Union Tribune, and I'm hearing from colleagues at the Los Angeles Times and other places where they're saying, now we're doing all of our work from home. And we're thinking, do we really need a full newsroom anymore when I can be doing all of my design and editing and everything at home? At City College, I had the newspaper staff at City College when I was the advisor there. We were doing the design and editing remotely because we didn't have a newsroom, because they didn't give us one, basically, because we were under construction. And that was in 2014. And I was realizing to myself, I've been practicing this for several years out of necessity, because I'm a small business, or I had students who didn't have the facilities yet, and now here we are. We all have to.
Yeah, there's actually a couple parts in your novel where the black market news peddlers are actually putting together their papers, and it was so much fun for me to read, because I have a journalism background myself as well, having done it in high school and studied it in college as well. And you have them with the wax and the razor blades and the rulers, literally cutting a layout, which anybody who didn't participate in journalism 20 years ago, 30 years ago, probably doesn't even know what you're talking about, which is something I find fascinating. But there was a snail's pace to getting the news out once upon a time that I think helped people kind of cool their nerves, double check their sources. There was time to sort what was truth versus what was fiction in a breaking news story, because you just didn't have the ability to run with it right then. And it was kind of neat to read that in your novel and be reminded of a time where, oh yeah, you could yell "stop the presses" and actually stop the news from going out.
That was one of my.
You can't do that anymore. That's done.
That was one of my favorite things to write in the book. What I wanted to do, there's sort of a retro tech element to this story. Mm-hmm. And I think people who are into retro technology are going to like this book for that reason, because I take in the story, news media has been so corrupted by the political and corporate environment that it's in this future that I've put together in this dystopia, that the real journalists have to go underground to do it. And the only way to do it, to stay off the networks and to keep from being tracked, is to do it through analog means, right? So it's typewriters, it's typesetting, it's running with real presses. A real piece of paper, you there's no tracer on that, right? And you can shred it and it's gone. So I loved writing all of that, because I got to pull from my memories of that environment. The Gen X generation, we're the last generation to experience any of that, because when I worked at North County Times, we were fully automated. We were digital in production and getting the paper out, and we were on early adopters online. In 1996, they had their 95. They had their news website going. When I got to the Union Tribune, they were still doing paste up, and that was in 2000. And they were still doing paste up until I think 2008 or 9. They were one of the last papers in the country to do away with it. and I miss that environment. I think something was lost with it, but at the same time, it's part of the progression, right?
Part of the progression.
But I pulled from all of those memories to create that aspect of the book, and that was a lot of fun in the writing because I enjoyed remembering the sounds and hearing the noises and the roar of the press and the zipping of the X-Acto knives and the sound of the wax and
well,
it was fun.
Speaking of memory, I wanna do you a memory right now. I'm going to bring onto the call the face of E-State from Human Resource, Mr. Steve Schwartz.
It's got to be Steve Schwartz then, yeah. the exec from E-State in Human Resource. How you doing, Steve?
If he'll unmute his mic, he can talk to us.
Oh, Steve.
I was using my implant. I was hoping that you would
Right.
get my message.
I still have those implants from that movie, and they still work. You can put 2 AA batteries in them, and they still flicker away. I think I've used them in 2 48-hour film projects as a prop for some whatever reason I needed to use them.
I remember seeing them in one of your 48s and going,
Yeah.
"Hey, I know that."
They've been in at least one of those movies. Yes.
Yeah, I think I even I tagged you in a great
Steve's
What is
known
that
as the
called,
Great
a tag?
Deflator.
Thank you. No, I lose words in the middle of a thought.
Okay.
It's just early onset dementia. Don't worry about it.
I'm doing well right now. I'm
thank you.
well right now. So
Yes,
you're
I'm
not the only
well
one who
too.
right. Yeah. You're,
No, I just saw something recently. I tagged you in a post on Facebook that someone was showing something futuristic where they were using implants like that, and I said, Roman, you were ahead of these people.
it's funny. When I described Human Resource to one of my colleagues at the Union Tribune at the time we were making it, and I said, "Yeah, everyone's gonna have this little implant, at their temple," and she said, "Well, I would love one of those." And I'm thinking, little did we know we might actually have them. I don't know if we love it so much, but she would have loved to have one. She said so. I should have given her one of the props. It didn't even occur to me.
Maybe.
Here you go. here's your implant. Stick it there and have fun with your friends.
Yes. We haven't gotten that far, but we have gotten remote controlled vibrators.
Is that a thing?
Yes, that actually is a thing.
Oh my god.
Fun to see some things haven't changed in 20
I
years,
know.
right, Roman?
Yes.
I know.
Oh God.
That's hilarious.
Well, back when we made Human Resource, the flip phone was still like nifty new technology. So,
True.
we've come a long
right.
way.
Here I thought Steve was going to be like, oh, you know how the phones are automated and you can do the smart house stuff. No, he talks about remote control.
In the remake of Logan's Run, they're going to include them.
That too.
In the remake of Logan's Run, they're probably going to include something like that or Zardoz, that movie with Sean Connery.
Oh dear God.
Hey,
One of the worst
Roman,
movies I've ever seen.
Oh
my God.
I binge watched something. I think it was on Netflix this past month that I think you probably would really enjoy. So I'd like you to take this down as a little bit of homework as friends.
Okay.
It's a show called Better Than Us. I believe it's a Russian program. Watch it in Russian and read the subtitles. You'll be
really?
You'll be happier than the dub. The dub's terrible, but it's a really fascinating show. I think you'll really enjoy it. And I would love to bring you on our Sci-Fi Sunday program to talk about that series together, because I think you'd be a great person to chat about that series with.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued now. Okay.
I just started watching Space Force.
Oh yeah, is that out now?
Right. I'm thinking, wait a minute. Are you talking about the President's Initiative or the show? Oh yeah, the show.
The
Well,
show.
they're both kind of a joke, right?
Yeah. How was the show?
I never liked The Office. Never got into it. So it's on that realm.
Oh, is it an office? Is it kind of an office-like show? How does it?
No,
It's just because Steve Carell's in it. I think Steve's saying he doesn't like Steve Carell.
No, I love Steve Carell. It's just the writing on this and some of the dialogue is very adolescent.
Which is sometimes the case with Steve Carell's work.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's maybe part of its charm, part of the fun,
But
right?
the cast that they got is pretty much anybody who was on Comedy Central, or in a Chris Guest mockumentary. Everybody's in it. So
that might be kind of fun, though.
Everybody's got cameos. So it's
Brian suggested watching Humans on Amazon. That's a really good one.
Humans is a great show. Love that show.
Haven't seen that one yet.
Is that the same Humans I'm thinking of? The one that was on
Sci-Fi Channel?
Yeah, it was on. Wasn't it on AMC for a time too?
Oh, was it? Might have been.
It's about the human android, the androids. Yeah, I love that show. It's a great show.
Carla Van Wagner says it's hard to get into Space.
Oh, Space Force? Well, it is. I mean, you got to apply. I mean, you can't like walk in and get launched on SpaceX.
I would
Becky
say
Damaski says, "Oh, Steven Schwartz."
I wonder why. No, it's the best way to describe Space Force is it's a live action version of Team America World Police.
It's kind of what it looks like.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Huh.
So you have to shove tongue firmly in cheek when you're watching this, and there's a beautiful there it goes again.
That's why we call him the Great Deflator.
Well, it's
There's a beautiful tribute. There's a beautiful tribute to an actor to that.
Is it loosely based on this Space Force concept that the White House is wanting to put together, or is it something entirely different?
No, it is not loosely based on the White House.
Oh, it's like really based on.
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is a direct from a tweet.
Did you see?
Oh, I've got to check it out.
Did you see a couple weeks ago? They have like a wall with like all the images of various generals in our military, and the guy who's in charge of Space Force. Somebody had pasted Steve Carell's photo over his face on an actual government display.
I love how the flag and the logo for Space Force is directly ripped off from Star Trek.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know, right?
It's so bad.
That's terrible.
All right, let's take the reins and get us back on track here. Roman. Okay, so after when everything gets cleared up, right? We can go outside again whenever that happens.
Mm-hmm.
There's an outside.
There is an outside. What are you hoping is the next thing? Are you gonna be plugging away doing novels? Are you gonna go back to film? What is ideal future?
That's a good question. I haven't given that a lot of thought yet. In the time that I've been sequestered during this whole thing, I've actually been jotting down some plot points and notes and scenes for a new novel. And this one also is based on a script that I finished maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But I don't know I don't know how far I'm gonna take it. I'm sort of on the fence. I'm thinking, well, maybe I'd like to write a script again too that's just fresh and new. One thing I do know is that Black Market News is finished. You're not going to see, unless it gets optioned for a show or a second book or a sequel or something or a movie, great. But, I'm not going to revisit that for a while. But I still want to, I don't know. I've been working on loosely a novel based on another script I've got. But I'm also wanting to just start fresh on something completely new. And that would be a script, just a new script. But I don't know yet. I haven't given it much thought. I've been so enveloped in grading and trying to manage my students after we left the semester halfway through and went all online. That's been almost all consuming to a point where I'm really tired. If any of my students watch this, I'm sorry, my students, but I'm tired of it, but I'm sure you are too. We're all in the same boat when it comes to that. So I know that all of us were quite fatigued. I don't blame them, and I hope they don't blame me either.
I pitched you an idea of something that you could work on last night. I hope.
Yes, that's right. Yes, we did. We did talk about that. So yes, that's there too.
Roman, with everything going on, is there any suggestions you could give to viewers about how they could double check the facts they're seeing on screen? As a journalist, I'm sure you've got your ideas on reliable sources, places they can go for fact checking. Because I know, you know, a lot of people like post Snopes.com right away on a Facebook post and say, you know, look at these, but you know, there's reason to not 100% believe everything Snopes says
No,
too. So,
Snopes sometimes has problems.
yeah. Do you have any
they're uneven.
recommendations?
Yeah,
Don't you say anything bad about Brooke Binkowski.
No, Snopes is uneven. I would say it's uneven. You know, when it's good, it's good. When it's not, it can be. Yeah, it's uneven. I think really the best thing that's worked for me is if you come across a story that just doesn't quite read right, make sure, or it's a broadcast as well. Go online and try to find as many versions of that same story from different reporters, different news outlets, and see what the consistencies are. And if you're finding a story that's consistent in its reporting, and sometimes, you know, journalists will jump off each other. A story is broken at one outlet, and then it gets picked up at other outlets, and they do their own original reporting. If there are consistencies in the reporting from outlet to outlet to outlet, that is one good way to put together a reasonable understanding that what you're reading is accurate, because these are separate reporters from separate outlets on separate deadlines, working with their own sources. And if it all comes together, then I think you've got a pretty good line of factual understanding. That should be that way in journalism anyway, even with the sources that you're working on for a story. If you come across consistencies in what ends up become newsworthy sometimes is where something is inconsistent, which means one source is telling you one thing, but another source is saying something a bit different, and then you have to sort of fill in the blanks there of what the factual accuracy is. But for a person who's out there just reading on social media or just picking up on news, I think having a variety of outlets is really helpful. Don't just read the New York Times, or don't just read the Washington Post. Read them both, and then throw in the Wall Street Journal for a good measure, because Wall Street Journal has a different audience that they're writing for. They're writing for generally a more center to conservative audience that's more business oriented. But if their facts and what they're discovering is similar to what the Washington Post is, which is a bit of a different audience sometimes, then you're onto something.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing I noticed yesterday, you know, because I see the arguments constantly going on about the protests that are happening, and everybody wants to focus on the violence and the looting and the stuff that's going on. And I keep kind of trying to remind people that there's multiple sides to this story happening. And one of those sides of the story is the cops are all misbehaving in this time too, and not doing themselves any favors. And one of the things I was noticing yesterday was, and I saw it on multiple different networks, the aerial shots of what's going on, say in Long Beach and Santa Monica, best examples. They would show looters attacking storefronts, and like a whole storefront, just all these looters attacking these storefronts. And then they would say, you know, but 3-4 blocks up the road is the peaceful protest. And where the looters are, you wouldn't see any cops doing anything about it. And they would go up to the peaceful protesters where there's a line of riot police, military Humvees and everything else. And it's obviously a peaceful protest. Maybe a little bit of like occasionally someone throw a water ball or whatever at the cops. And then the cops start shooting rubber bullets and tear gas into the peaceful protesters. While 2 blocks away, all the looting and vandalism and heavy bad actors are doing their business. And they're just completely ignoring them in favor of shooting into peaceful protesters. And not a single network, while they covered all that, pointed out the error in procedure.
I think in defense of, I don't disagree with that, because I think that what we were seeing in the footage was, especially last night and night before, was just insane. But one of the things that I was hearing on Channel 8 last night when we had some trouble in downtown San Diego, Channel 8's been really good about this, by the way, KFMB. They had, I think, 2 or 3, yeah, it was 2 or at least 2 reporters, but I think there were 3. They were spread out with the protesters this was by 11 o'clock last night, and the protesters were in clusters, and they had broken up at some point, and then some were going down Front Street, some were off somewhere on B Street, some were in the gas lamp quarter, wherever they may be. And you would see police have a line at one street as protesters were gathering, but then you would see in another part of downtown more trouble with a lot fewer cops, if any at all. And the only explanation that I would give, and I'm not speaking for all instances in this, is that law enforcement is, I think, also overwhelmed in all of this too. And they might, where they put all their forces to what they think is going to be the problem, and ends up maybe not being the problem. Over here, it's like a balloon. You squeeze it, and there's a little bit of the balloon that comes out over here, or there's a bit of the balloon that comes out over here, and you're squeezing all this over here, but then the bit of the balloon out over here is blown out, and then you've got to sort of readjust where everything is going to go. I saw this in some footage on from Santa Monica last night. There was some looting going on, and the reporter was noting that there was no law enforcement presence at all. This was on I guess it's called the Santa Monica Promenade, or what that's called. And there were looters just going into stores, and there was no law enforcement presence at all. But then as the reporter was continuing going on, it was Gotti Schwartz on MSNBC. Then within about 5 to 7 minutes of his reporting, sirens went off, and red and blue lights started flashing from down the street, and they all went boom, like cats in a room when a boom goes off. They just went, they disappeared, and then they rushed in and arrested several of the looters, but they were not there for quite some time.
Yeah,
I don't know what the answer is or what the motivation is.
And I'm not saying that I have an answer to that, or that you would have an answer to that.
Yeah.
The thing for me that I keep seeing in the news is a lack of asking the question about the procedure.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's
and I understand being overwhelmed, but the question has to be asked: how are the police forces approaching dealing with these situations? And is it appropriate in the manner that they're doing it? And I would argue, if you take a good look and read the reports, our friend Karen Perlman was in La Mesa. Read the reports about how often the police ignore the looting and then start firing and create chaos into a peaceful protest, which then pushes them into the looting areas and makes it more difficult to decide who's what.
This was happening in Minneapolis too, because in the first nights when things were really sort of exploding, there was no police presence or law enforcement. I don't want to say just police, but law enforcement presence at all in those areas as the buildings were burning. And there were questions that night. And I was wondering too about whether or not that was a tactical decision. In other words, if you bring law enforcement in right away, are you going to actually inflame who's there already and make the situation that's already worse, and then have a loss of life as opposed to loss of buildings or infrastructure? I've heard that discussion, especially over the first couple of nights in Minneapolis, but it hasn't. That seems to have not been discussed a lot. And I think this goes back to the procedural question. I haven't heard that discussion much since in the last couple of nights. I don't know. I could see where that might be a strategic or a tactical decision. But I'd like to see that explained a bit more as to why. I would have liked to have seen, for example, maybe a police chief or two have done this, and I just haven't seen it. But I don't want to say that I haven't heard this because it hasn't been done. But I would like to see a commissioner or a police chief say, we made the tactical decision not to go there because we knew that there was looting, we knew that there was rioting, and if we went over there, there'd be too many lives potentially in the balance when it comes to burning buildings and the people who are really committing the violence, as opposed to pepper balls and flashbangs at protesters who are just pushing us a bit too much on the front line. I don't know, but I think that could be one thing that could be explained a bit more.
Yeah.
Sure. I would be curious.
Go ahead, Whitney.
I would be curious to see. I mean, I was thinking about like, people who do hostage situations where the idea is to de-escalate. And you've seen this a little bit across the country where like the cops have, walked in solidarity.
Michigan.
Flint, Michigan. Yeah. He's a perfect example where they started a dialogue. I'm just curious. I would be curious to find out how much of that training is words.
Proliferating?
Steve, this is your fault. It's contagious. You brought it in here. How much that's taught across the country, or
it's not my problem. It's not my problem. You can't say proliferate.
Yeah, and yet it is.
Did I just hear proliferate or proliferate, Stephen? Proliferate, or is it now? Now I don't know either. That's not fair. Oh, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, thank you, Stephen.
Carla Van Wagoner, her comments on the screen right now. She says, "I think that's why they called in the National Guard to guard high-end retail." I have the same question about bricks being brought to the protests. Why don't the police go to the sites where the bricks are and scoop them up? They know they're going to be used.
Yeah, there was an incident where a police horse was badly injured by a thrown brick. And yeah,
I'm sorry, Stephen. The way you said that, I was thinking, okay, what joke is coming up?
No, it's not.
The way you said that,
unfortunately,
but unfortunately, no, I know.
Unfortunately, no. I was admonished by my horse friends from back east for not mentioning this, and
really?
I said, I'm sorry, and it's disgusting that it happened, but I'm not surprised because when things escalate like this. There's no rules in a riot. I mean, if you're looking for rules for a riot, they're not going to be one. I mean, I said, if you're going to throw gasoline on a fire, don't be surprised when it explodes in your face. I mean, this is what happens when things get out of control. Yeah, a horse got injured, and it's disgusting that someone actually threw a brick at a horse. But you're surprised that something is escalating out of control, that nothing is actually being done to quell the violence other than attack it with more violence.
It's the whole topic is, again, it's really prescient because in the book, in Black Market News, there's a part where, and again, I'm not giving away any spoilers with this. This is not a spoiler moment, but Quinn is out there doing some of his underground work, and he's working with a source who's in touch with like paramilitary or law enforcement up in Los Angeles. And during riots and protests, the number of paramilitary and officers who are being injured and killed in all this rioting is being underreported because E-State does not want to have bad numbers out there showing that their police forces are not
eerily familiar.
Sounds very familiar.
So it's like because of poor training and cutting corners and stuff like that. It's just like if there's a time to write and read a book like this, it's now, man. I mean, it's crazy. Even for me, I'm like, I'm pretty blown away by this in terms of the timing.
Right.
Yeah.
Steve Troop said, "I want to know why they have cameras on every jaywalker who crosses the street, but don't have any cameras on whoever's dropping off the bricks." It's an interesting question.
Huh. I don't know.
Yeah, those cameras are supposedly running all the time, right? The red light cams and stuff.
Well, if we had E-State running everything, we would.
Yeah. Oh, I think we do. We just don't have access.
Actually,
we just don't know yet.
I don't know where San Diego is with their red light cameras. Last time when I was down there working in TV news, the red light cameras were shut off and not in operation because the county was suing the manufacturer of those cameras for actually moving the sensors. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, the manufacturer and installers were getting a small piece of every ticket that was generated, and then the county realized that they moved the sensor to make it more possible,
kind of like sensitive, I guess, to trigger
to trigger the red light camera to go off and to issue a citation, and they would get a portion of that fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. Encinitas just ended its contract with the red light camera company that they were contracting with for, gosh, like what, 10, 15 years now. So the red light cameras are off in Encinitas now.
Yeah, the red light cameras here in Oceanside by my house all went offline about 2 years ago now.
Yeah, they've been slowly phasing them out because people, I think they were a good traffic deterrent for a time, but at the same time, I don't know, there are too many ways to mess with them too, in a way that it becomes a revenue generator as opposed to a true safety measure. And I think that's where the problem with them is.
Well, that's always the difficulty, right? Is commerce versus versus law.
Yeah, a lot of them are still in operation in Orange County. So
I don't know if I should be surprised by that or not, but yeah, that would be,
more northern Orange County, Anaheim, are having the protests and everything. I think the biggest protest I had in Mission Viejo was that a Starbucks ran out of nutmeg, and
it was a Karen riot.
It was a Karen riot. Yeah,
like Steve Troop's comment in my new book, Red Light News. I call it all this.
Make it a graphic novel, Steve.
Yes.
We missed a question from Carla earlier regarding the SpaceX.
Right. Let me address Brian's comment here first. He said, I read something about during the riots, cops turn off their cams and cover their badge number. Not sure the precedent.
Covering their ass.
CYA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Here we go. Here's Carla's question. Saturday's space launch. Getting back to, like, we're in this weird repeat of the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Saturday space launch. Thoughts? Perhaps the next book can be about private versus government in the space race.
That would be a fun one.
Well, as I posted on Facebook, in India, some monkeys broke into a lab and stole vials of blood.
Yeah, I saw that.
We had the riots going on, and now we have a space launch. So what's the over-under of those astronauts coming back to a Planet of the Apes?
Well, I can tell you this.
Yeah.
Growing up, I was always like fascinated at getting to 2010, right? Like for some reason, 2001 and 2010 were like, maybe because it's the books and the movies, and it's like, those are going to be big deals when we get there. I had no clue that 2020 was going to be the year of absolute batshit craziness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also have to understand, if you look back in our history, 1968, 1969, we were having race riots like crazy going on, and the space race at the same time. And it was in 1968 when Apollo 8 went up and got that iconic Earthrise shot that people started writing into NASA saying, thank you, you just saved the 60s, because it was something that could inspire people. And because you had the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and you had everything going on in the South. And then this was going on in space. And we've come almost 50 years later, we've come full circle with this amazing private enterprise going up, launching in space. I mean, I'm amazed just watching everything that in front of them, they had 3 touchscreen panels for every single thing that they had to do. When if you look back at the Apollo mission, every single surface had
a dip switch.
Was a dip switch or something that they had to switch, and they had to turn around saying, oh no, we got to flush the toilet. Let me go in the back of the back of the spacecraft and flush the toilet for you. It was amazing.
Totally.
It's absolutely amazing. Everything is on a touch screen, and it's so Spartan inside.
Well, I will say this: my favorite part of the launch, because I watched it live. I don't know if all you guys watched it live.
I did.
But my favorite part of the launch was watching Tremor, the little dinosaur, when he finally started floating around the cockpit. I was like, I was remotely watching with my nephew Aiden, who's a huge SpaceX fan, and I just love how into all of this kind of new space race he is. I texted him, I'm like, hey, is that the first dinosaur in space? He says, absolutely. Yep. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was nice to see something kind of bright and cheery in the midst of all this, with a kind of family oriented lightheartedness as well. Roman, thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks.
I want to reiterate to everybody where they can find your book. They can get it as a ebook or in paperback on Amazon.com, and they can also find it as a paperback at BarnesandNoble.com.
Roman, you wrote a book?
A little late to the party, Stephen.
Yeah, a little
Steve.
Steve.
to throw that in.
Anything you'd like to say, parting words to our viewers, Roman, before I send you off?
The last thing I would say, and I was just thinking about this, and it's about the book. One other thing about it is sort of a note and a commentary to the younger generations coming up. I'm concerned about, because if you notice in the book, Quinn and Jasper and Kay are sort of sandwiched in between these generations, where they're almost being used by the people who have come before them and maybe some of the people who might be coming after them. And so for me, I like that the book also covers the idea that that young people need to make sure that they have control over their own lives and in their own ways of thinking, and to make sure that they are not used by the sources and the forces around them to direct their lives perhaps in ways that they don't want them to go.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Roman, we're going to say goodbye to you, and I'm going to chat with my two co-hosts here for a little bit. Thank you again for joining us. I'm so proud of you for getting this novel done, and for seeing your vision of this story through after all these years. Art is one of those things that gestates and takes time, and this is a perfect example of it. And my hat's off to you.
Thank you, David. Whitney, it was great to talk to you. And Stephen, it was good to see you too.
Great seeing you, Roman.
And Carla, and Brian, and Steve Troop, and everybody else on live comments. Good to see you too. Thank you.
Someday we'll see each other face to face again.
I know. I hope so.
Yes.
I hope so. This was a blast. Thanks.
All right. Bye, Roman.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
I want to do one thing here. Hold on a second. I want to show that. Yeah, get rid of this. No, hide that. Okay. There, all our names are good. I just wanted to bring up a couple comments here. Steve Troop brought this one up. You may not be aware of this, but I know a fair bit about Star Trek. And one of the criticisms of modern Trek is that one of the benefits to physical switches is that when the power goes out, touch screens are useless.
Right.
And you can't see the switches in the dark.
Steve, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm glad you were able to get in eventually.
Yeah, I was, what do you call it? Sleeping.
Yeah.
Time. Normally, time.
As Whitney keeps saying in Pandemic, time has no meaning now.
Yes.
Time, whatever. So I just have to point this out because now that we're all live on, look at all the alliteration. DD, WWW, SS. I'm very amused by this. That is all.
Okay.
That's all.
It's
Because
so good.
we're on the
So good
radio.
to see you guys.
Yes.
Good to see you too.
Yes.
Yeah, this represents a new era for the podcast. We're gonna.
And
do
I have
more
my
of this
new.
as we go. Yeah, look, he's got a ring light.
I got a ring light now.
Nice.
I am absolutely impressed by Amazon because this is actually my second one, because the first one that I got was defective, and there was a short in the switch here, and I couldn't use it. It just too jiggly, and it would cut in and out. And so I went to return it, and they said that there's a return center right near me within 15 minutes. So I boxed it up and I sent it, and I immediately got an email saying that we got it, we're returning it, and we're sending you a new one. In 24 hours, a new one was at my doorstep. So I was very impressed with that. So
Carla called your nap a pandemic nap.
Actually, it's taking care of your brother nap.
Napdemic.
an epidemic. I have to nap when he naps. So
Brian says, so true. I feel it's Thuzande the 11/14th.
yes.
Well,
Yeah.
this is fun, guys. I'm so looking forward to doing more of our podcast this way. We will be interviewing filmmaker Michael Matteo Rossi this Friday at 5:30. So be sure to subscribe to our live streams on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/intellectual network. And our Facebook page is facebook.com/intellectual entertainment. You can also find our podcast at the Gonna Geek Network, gonnageeknetwork.com, or just gonnageek.com, along with a whole host of other geeky podcasts that I'm sure you'll love. And we are also available on all the major podcast platforms, from Spotify to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. And I hope you'll subscribe to us there as well. There are over 260 episodes of the podcast available to download and listen to, covering the course of almost 7 years of interviews on our show. So pretty incredible. This coming November will be the end of 7 years of the podcast, which I can't believe it. I certainly didn't see us doing this kind of live streaming when we started it. We talked about doing video at the beginning, and it was just not feasible. We have survived long enough for it to become this, which is just incredible. And my friends, I am happy you were able to join me today. I love you guys very much, and I hope you stay safe in the pandemic. And hopefully we all get to hang out again together very soon.
Yes.
And in that regard as well, I'd like to thank our patron, Next Gen Automotive. That's nxtgenautomotive.com. They are selling the most amazing mask that you can buy. It's HEPA filter. It's form fitted. You can talk in it. You can breathe clearly in it, and it's easy to clean. And I don't know, if you're having a hard time finding a mask, this is it. It's
Look
fantastic. I'm gonna go full screen with me here. Let me. I want to show it to everybody. So this is one of the Next Gen masks. They come apart. They're designed for the HEPA filter to be replaced very easily. They have the valve for breathing. There's a pack of replacements. It's very cool. You look like Bane if you get the black one. They have it in white as well. I got it for a bunch of our intellectuals, and I recommend, if you guys don't have them yet, that you get them for yourselves as well, and for your family.
How well do they work with wearing glasses? Because
they work great.
Because every single time I put the word glasses, if I have to make it show the mask is underneath my glasses, that if I exhale, I fog up my glasses.
Show us yours on with your glasses. So Brian's going to come here and
Brian's going to be a model.
He's going to model for you.
Thank you, Carol Merrill.
Here we go. So Brian's got glasses and a hat on.
Yeah. So it's got one long string that you can pull from the bottom and the top with a little clasp here. So you just kind of put this part around your neck and then pull it from the top here. Like that, back on.
He was not expecting to model, so he had to practice. But,
like that. And you can adjust how tight you want it with a little clasp right there. Right there. Yes, I have glasses, and the rubber seal completely seals everything, and I never have any fog, and my glasses can sit, and I have the trifocals. They can sit exactly where I need them.
Nice.
Yeah, and you can hear him talking.
And you can hear me talking, and it's not pushing against it. It's great to breathe in. Much better than the cloth masks that are just completely covering you like this. It's really nice.
How much are these?
I think they're like $40 or $45. So they're a little pricey, but comes with 5 of the filters, which are good for, I think, 40 hours of use before they need to be replaced. And then you just buy replacement filters. but honestly, it's that plastic piece that I think is the greatest selling point. I love the HEPA filter because I'm a high risk individual, so I actually feel more comfortable having the HEPA filter over just a cloth.
Yeah.
But once you have the mask,
It doesn't pull on your ears.
Brian loves it. He was skeptical when I told him I was buying them, but he wears it every time he goes out now. So
Okay.
I want to thank them for sponsoring the show. They gave us a few for the intellectual family. And after I bought a couple, I called them up. I said, "Hey, I want to support you. Can we advertise for you?" And so I believe in the product. I will never advertise a product on the intellectual that I don't believe in. So there you have it. Guys, thank you so much. Whitney, if you go back out protesting, please stay safe.
Thank you.
I'm always concerned about you, but I can see that you're getting sun doing so. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not pasty white anymore, right? So
Obviously, I haven't protested. Look at this progression. This progression of dark to light is just.
Steve, my friend, take care of your brother, take care of your dad, give them my love. And I hope everybody will join us again this Friday when we interview Michael Matteo Rossi. We're going to talk with him about his new film, Shadows, feature film, which I actually did the post-production sound on. So it'll be fun to talk to another filmmaker about his film. He's a former SDSU grad who's making movies up in LA and doing some great stuff. So it'll be good to talk to him. Guys,
awesome.
Have a great day. Have a good week. And I'll see you all again very, very soon.
All right. Stay safe, everyone.
And to our listeners, thank you guys so much. We'll see you again, hopefully in 4 days.